this event. I would like to start by introducing myself. I'm Moin Ayub, the Vice President of Subject Association of Department of History and Culture. I welcome all the students and professors on behalf of the department. Before starting this event, I would like to pay tribute to our beloved Professor Rizwan Kesh. Being close to Rizwan sir, apart from all his academic and administrative achievements, her individuality shines at every circumstances. A great communicator whose words have set foot on every mind and heart he came across. He welcomed the students with same warmth and even took their opposed thoughts in a pleasant and loving manner. A best human at every step who always said, fight and die rather than just die. Even these words are less to describe him as a great human.
Yeah.
आखिर में मैं सर के लिए शेरी कहना चाहता हूँ, वो ये है कि लाजिम था कि देखो मेरा रास्ता कोई दिन और, लाजिम था कि देखो मेरा रास्ता कोई दिन और, तन्हा गए क्यों अब रहो तन्हा कोई दिन और, जाते हुए कहते हो कयामत को मिलेंगे, जाते हुए कहते हो कयामत को मिलेंगे, क्या खूब कयामत का है गोया कोई दिन और. Today's event has been organized by Moriki, a history society. This society operates under the Subject Association of Department of History and Culture. The purpose of this society is to make students aware about the wide range of history. Our team organizes monthly talks where we invite society and faculty members to throw a guiding light upon the major historical events. As the first step forward, we have invited Professor Syed Irfan Habib, Indian historian of science and modern political history. He was the Abul Kalam Azad Chair at Educational Planning and Administration and has done extensive work on modern India, particularly Indian freedom movement. I would like to request our HOD, Professor Nishat Manzar, to welcome Irfan. Thank you.
अनम्यूट कीजिएगा अभी.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Moin, and it's my pleasant duty to welcome Professor Syed Irfan Habib. And thank you to each and every one of you for joining and for being here today. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Professor Syed Irfan Habib, and I wish to thank him for accepting our invitation of our students, because this event is being organized by the Subject Association. Subject Association is an essential part of every department where students form an association out of the members chosen from the class as class representatives. So Moin Ayub, Vice President of this year's Subject Association, Arpita and Gauhar, and all the members were quite active in this endeavor. And I'm again quite thankful to Professor Syed Irfan Habib that he agreed to share his views on such a relevant theme, which is so relevant in present scenario. And our students, out of utmost affection for Professor Rizwan Kesh, have dedicated this first lecture of the series to him, and I hope more activities will take place. And thank you, Irfan Bhai, once again.
Yes.
And I hand over the charge to Moin and Javed Alam. I'm again thankful to Javed Alam for agreeing to chair the session. Thank you and welcome once again.
Thank you, Nishat. Thank you.
Ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. We have Dr. Javed Alam as our chair today. Now, I would like to proceed and ask the chairperson of this event, Dr. Javed Alam sir, and enlighten us about the concept. Sir.
Professor Irfan Sahab has been already welcomed 8 years back when I was in charge of extension lecture. I had invited you and you had delivered a very powerful lecture in our department. So today I have to introduce you in brief and then about Maulana Azad. Professor Irfan Habib is generally known as a historian of science who had, along with Dhruv Raina, had produced some pioneering work in the area of history of science and technology during the colonial period in India. He has written and edited several books on. He has also written and edited several books on political history of India, which attracted considerable scholarly attention. But to me, his greatest contribution to the modern Indian historiography is that he has rescued Bhagat Singh in his seminal work from the appropriation of the neo-nationalist group, or the group intoxicated with toxic nationalism, which had kept itself aloof while the nationalist forces under a common platform were challenging the British overlordship in India. As a student in the late 70s and 80s and even in 90s, I have seen that group celebrating Bhagat Singh as their hero. It was only after the publication of Professor Habib's book, To Make the Deaf Hear, Ideology and Program of Bhagat Singh and his comrades, they began to distance this revolutionary and foremost secular leader of modern India. And finally, they realized that the appropriation of this radical figure is not appropriate for them. This book, besides, he has written and edited several other books, and he had delivered, and he had been visiting professor in different universities. But to me, this introduction is far above others. So I emphasize on this introduction. Now a few words about Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. He was one of the most distinguished nationalist leader of India's freedom struggle. The first scholarly study of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad appeared in 1988 in the centenary year of Azad by I.H. Douglas. It was his DPhil thesis presented at Oxford in 1969 and was prepared for publication after his death by Gail Minold and Christian Prowl. It is not a political biography, it is his religious and intellectual biography. A significant number of books appeared during and after Azad's centenary celebration in 1988 or 89. But V.N. Datta's book, Maulana Azad, published in 90, acquired considerable significance. Thereafter, in 88, two conferences were organized. Professor Musirul Hassan, our teacher, my mentor, he has organized an international conference in December 1988 at the at our department. And another national conference was organized by Khorabak's Oriental Library at Patna in February 1989. 1989, and in December 1989, Jamia had organized international conference. I had attended both the conference. During that period, I was at the stage of collecting PhD materials. So I had attended both these conferences. In Jamia conference, Gail Minold, while presenting her paper, described Maulana Azad as an enigmatic figure. He was so intelligent, so important, yet she described him as an enigmatic figure because there was no comprehensive work on him, and that is why she described him as an enigmatic figure. Proceedings of this seminar was edited by Professor Musirul Hassan and was published in 1992. during this period, in the year 1889, Rizwan Kaisar, he had prepared his synopsis was approved in the Southeastern study under Uma Kaura. His proposal for Maulana Azad's biography was approved in that year. And he took so much time, but he had produced a very good and comprehensive work on Maulana Azad's life, which included his political life and his active political life during freedom movement and after his role as nation builder. Again, I understand perhaps it was in 2006 or 7. Professor Irfan Habib was given Maulana Azad chair at New Palm, and he too started working on Maulana Azad. We are still, after Professor Rizwan Kaisar's work, we are still waiting to see Professor Irfan Habib's work and hope that it would uncover essential but neglected aspects of Maulana Azad's active political life. So today, this is about Maulana Azad and his work on him. Today, Professor Habib will speak on Maulana Azad, Islam and Nationalism. So now it is over to you, Professor Habib.
Thank you, Javed. Thank you very much. When Arpita called me or sent me a mail to speak at Jamia, obviously I'm not new to Jamia, and then Jamia is new to me. I immediately agreed and decided. I wrote to her that we should dedicate this lecture to Rizwan, because Rizwan not only worked on Maulana Azad, on whom I am working these days, and using his work extensively for my own book. We had a long association which goes back to almost 30 years back, when we used to spend a lot of time in Tirmurti. He was working on his PhD in JNU, and we used to spend lots of time discussing, having tea, and I used to smoke in those days, to smoke together. And then we traveled together later on, and last travel together, which was a very memorable one, was to Dhaka, where we went together and spent a week over there, traveled around Dhaka a lot together. So these memories are so vivid, and I can never forget, because the man, he, as a human being, as a scholar, of course, he was very good. As a human being, as someone who respected everybody who came in touch with him, who was little older to him, even younger ones, his students, he loved them and he respected them like equals. So this was something very, very characteristic of Rizwan, which is not very, very, very common trait these days. And so I really remember him today before I start talking about Maulana Azad. For me, the subject is not because I'm working on Maulana Azad these days. That was one reason. Another reason was that Maulana Azad spoke about an India which is the idea of India, which is somehow under severe threat today. And we need to talk about it. There are lots of definitions of nationalism floating around, and many definitions actually don't come anywhere close to the idea of nationalism or nation which Maulana had, or his senior colleagues from freedom struggle like Sardar Patel and Nehru, Gandhi, etc. had. they conceived of something else for India, and that after independence, that vision continued to be with us for many years. It remained under threat even before independence from both sides, from Hindu as well as Muslim communalists. But people like Azad and Nehru, Gandhi, Patel, they kept fighting. Today, a situation has come when this whole idea of India, of nation, of nationalism is under severe strain. And we need to recall what exactly the vision Azad upheld. And not alone, this vision was shared by him with so many of his colleagues during freedom struggle. I'm talking of Azad because Azad was very prolific in his ideas. He wrote about them and he expressed them very strongly. And I'm trying to put together these ideas in the book, and I will just share with you part of it in this brief little time we have. Maulana Azad was actually one of those nationalists. मतलब वो उन लोगों में थे, आइकॉनिक नेशनलिस्ट में थे, जो अकेले पार्टीशन के इशू को लेकर अकेले रहे आखिर तक. Nehru, Gandhi, Patel, everybody agreed. He was the last man standing. So this we need to keep in mind all the time, because ये एक ऐसा मुद्दा है जो आज बार-बार उठाया जाता है, और मैं इसको आगे थोड़ा सा बढ़ाऊंगा भी अपने लेक्चर में कि हिंदुस्तान को डिवाइड किया, उसमें यहाँ से जो मुसलमान यहाँ रहे वो यहाँ क्यों रहे, पाकिस्तान बन गया तो वहाँ चला जाना चाहिए था. तो मौलाना आजाद जैसे लोगों ने, और मैं ये भी बताना चाहता हूँ और आप आगे इसको मैं थोड़ा इलेबोरेट भी करूंगा कि मौलाना आजाद अकेले नहीं थे. ये भी एक बड़ा भ्रम फैला जाता है. मतलब again and again it is said that he was actually a showboy, which Jinnah used to call him derisively, which is not true. No, he had a large number of Muslims who shared his vision, and so he fought along with so many others. So he was not alone. Maulana was actually exposed to diverse influences even as a teenager, and had enough time and scholarship to formulate his ideas about nation, about nationalism. An understanding and exposure which allowed him to give access to a multiplicity of views and also space to everyone despite differences in religion, culture and languages. So this is something very, very profound about him, which we need to remember, that despite the fact that he was an alim of Islam, he was a scholar of Islam, despite that, he did not see it as a constraint or as a handicap. Despite that, he provided space to other religions, other cultures, other languages in his life. He expands these ideas in detail as a youngish man of 35, and because he was actually the youngest president of the Indian National Congress in 1923. In this session, he talked of the natural laws that govern society, which are obscured for us due to our emotional biases, though our intellect recognizes them. He spoke about the amazing uniformity of laws of social life, quoting Umar Khayyam. He said, "Life is the same story, repeated over and over again with new names and new characters." So, Maulana Azad, as we know, as I said earlier, was an Islamic scholar. He began almost as a missionary of Islam. मतलब वो पूरी जिंदगी उन्होंने जो शुरुआत हुई वो पूरे इस्लाम की एक मिशनरी की तरह शुरुआत हुई. पूरी जिंदगी की उनके जो शुरू की राइटिंग्स हैं उसमें आप देखिएगा कि वो he was very close to the sectarian idea of the world. You know, he was so confined to Islam in the early life. But despite that, his antipathy towards the British colonial occupation was also not confined to India alone. Like if we look at his writings, he is a man who is not against the colonization of India alone. He is anti-imperialist. You know, in that context, you can call him pan-Islamist. Like he was talking about colonization of most of the Muslim world, and he's talking about Muslim world because he had no idea of what Latin America was going through. His concern was area close to him. Culturally, he was exposed to. So he was talking about that. But we can expand it broadly as an anti-imperialist vision, which was not just confined to India alone. So he was basically an anti-imperialist, and he wanted the world to be free of colonization, colonial exploitation, whatever culture, whatever country was suffering with this balance. Now, before I go ahead, let us also have a little look at the early years of Maulana Azad, which will give us some idea why Maulana Azad conceived this idea of composite nationalism or indivisible nationalism, or pluralism or pluralist idea of Indian nationalism. You can give different names to it. The beginnings are interesting, and they're not many people actually know about it. Like I'm not talking of scholars, but generally the lay person, they are not aware of the background of Maulana Azad, his early days, how he was exposed, to what forces he was exposed to, and why he became what he became later on. Now, at the age of 13, at a young age of 13, when people don't even think coherently as young people today, he was editing a journal called Lisan al-Sidq, Voice of Truth. This was the Urdu paper, which he edited from 1903 to 1905. In this period in Calcutta, his office was at 14 Tarachand Datta Street. And in this area, there were a large number of diverse populations living, where you had Hindu Bengali elite, you had a large number of Punjabis living there, lots of Egyptian population, migrant Egyptians living over there, there were Peshawaris living over there, and there were lots of Bengali Muslims. And there was a huge Marwadi population. So this was an area Maulana Azad was exposed to, diverse people, where he had his office of Lisan al-Sidq. In this exposure, he came in touch with people like Shamsundar Chakravarti. Shamsundar Chakravarti was very close to Aurobindo Ghosh, and because of this association, he introduced Maulana Azad as a young man to Aurobindo, and Maulana writes that he actually met Aurobindo Ghosh 3 or 4 times. Now, in this period, he wanted to join one of these underground revolutionary organizations called Anushilan Yugantar. And I have seen this in my work on Bhagat Singh as a background when I was working years ago, that these organizations were actually quite rabidly communal. They did not have faith in Muslims. They didn't, and they were not to be blamed actually, because the partition of Bengal had happened in 1905. There was huge communalization being spread by the British because of this division, and so Muslims were suspect by a large number of people. So Maulana wanted to join. He joined finally Yugantar, which was less communal, and Shamsundar Chakravarti helped him to join it. So he spent early years. So this was an exposure of Maulana Azad to nationalism, which was a very aggressive, revolutionary nationalism he was exposed to as a young man. Now, there is a early period where he is also exposed to, and I called it diverse in the beginning. It is diverse because of this. One variety is this, which I have just talked to you. Another variety was that he was in touch with people like Maulana Ubaidullah Sindhi, Maulana Mahmudullah Hasan. And I don't know whether you have heard about this famous Reshmi Rumal controversy. This Reshmi Rumal controversy happened, between these Deobandi ulamas who wanted to overthrow the British rule, and they exchanged these letters, which were written on Reshmi cloth, and because of that, it got this name, Reshmi Rumal controversy. And it is said that Maulana Azad also, as a young man, was involved with this Reshmi Rumal controversy as well. Another interesting thing, which, and I'm talking about this background of Maulana Azad because you need to really know what sort of influences as a young man Maulana Azad came across. Maulana Azad traveled as a young man to Punjab, and in Punjab, he came in touch with many people, but there were two important people who are mentioned in the records. He came in touch with Sufi Amba Prasad. Sufi Amba Prasad was basically from Muradabad, who was a Persian scholar and who had a lot of understanding of Sufism. That's why his name became Sufi Amba Prasad. And Maulana also met Sardar Ajit Singh. Sardar Ajit Singh was Bhagat Singh's uncle, and who was very seriously involved in peasant movement in 1906-07 in Punjab. And I have written about it recently during the farmers' protest in Punjab, which is going on, that the history of this protest goes back to early 20th century. So Maulana Azad met Ajit Singh as well. So this was the background which Azad was exposed to. In 1908, his father, Maulana Khairuddin, passed away, and Maulana traveled as a young man to West Asia. Now, this is another influence in formulating his nationalism, his idea of nation and nationalism about India. He traveled to West Asia. He went to Turkey, he went to Egypt, and he went to Iran, Iraq. And there, as a young man, he met people like Mustafa Kamil. Mustafa Kamil was the founder of National Party, Al-Hizb al-Watani, which was very popular party in those times in Egypt. So Maulana came in touch with him, spent a lot of time with him. He met somebody called, not many people hear about him, people like Jurji Zaidan. Jurji Zaidan was a Christian Arab who was a founder of a paper called Al-Hilal. Al-Hilal was a paper he used to bring out from Cairo. So Maulana also saw lots of other people. These two people I mentioned particularly because Mustafa Kamil was surprised when Maulana Azad met him. He was surprised that what sort of Muslims are you in India? You are actually not together with other Indians to fight against the British. We here in Egypt, we are actually working in collaboration with our Coptic Christians. We are all together. Our nationalism is composite. No, our enemy is common enemy, which is the European colonizer. No, how come you in India? And he was referring to Muslim League in this context. He was referring to Muslim League, that Muslim League actually is not cooperating in this fight. They are not part of this struggle against the British. This was a news which they must have got across, from Indian papers and Indian press. And he complained to Maulana Azad that what is this? What sort of Muslims are you? So you need to go back and formulate a policy of nation and nationalism, which is composite, which is of togetherness, because you cannot fight British imperialism without getting together on a common platform. So these were the early influences which I thought I should share with you, because normally we don't come across these facts very much. All this helped Azad to counter the faith-based nationalism of Muslim League. मतलब ये जो पूरी background है जो मैंने अभी दिया, इससे मौलाना ने इसको एक टूल की तरह इस्तेमाल किया, हथियार की तरह इस्तेमाल किया, मुस्लिम लीग के खिलाफ जो एक संकीर्ण, जो नैरो अंडरस्टैंडिंग नेशनलिज्म की थी, उसको ब्रॉडन करने के लिए, ना ये सब इन्फ्लुएंसेस जो मौलाना आज़ाद पर रहे शुरू की अपनी जवानी के वक्त में, उसने मौलाना को काफी मदद की अपने राष्ट्रवाद को डिफाइन करने में और मेजोरिटेरियन जो नेशनलिज्म है उसको काउंटर करने में. Maulana Azad saw himself as a Muslim, but more than that, he declared himself a proud Indian and part of the indivisible unity called the Indian nationality. It was a precious part of his being, which he was not prepared to surrender at any cost. Azad declared in 1921, and 1921 is the time when he writes Call of Faisal. There is a famous statement he writes before he is jailed for 2 years in Haripur Central Jail in Calcutta. He writes, the need of the hour is that the 7 crore Muslims living in India should establish such close ties with and develop such fellow feeling with the 22 crore Hindus that they may henceforth be reckoned as one single nation and country, as inseparable parts of one combined in an indivisible whole. Now, these are the words, these are the strong words which he expressed as a young man in 1921. He wanted Hindus and Muslims to be part of one homogeneous group, which he called Ummat-e-Wahida, one nation. Maulana Azad was no doubt an Islamic scholar and began his public life espousing the cause of Muslims, which is reflected in his early writings in Lisan al-Sidq, Al-Hilal, etc. However, even in 1912, now 1912 is very early, and that is a year when he brings out this paper Al-Hilal, and this Al-Hilal is taken from Jurji Zadan's paper in Egypt, which I just talked about. He borrowed this title of the paper from Jurji Zadan's Al-Hilal in Egypt. Here Azad is clear about the indispensability of Hindu-Muslim unity and wrote about the fears being spread by the colonial government and the League in his Al-Hilal. This article in 1912 is quite explicit in Azad's commitment to independence and the role Muslims should play. He wanted them to be in the vanguard of the freedom struggle, at the front lines of the freedom struggle. Maulana Azad wrote this mainly in response to the growing influence of Muslim League and to dissuade Muslims from getting carried away by its communal politics. And when we see Maulana Azad's writings, many of his writings are very strong. His words are very strong. He actually is like one can understand the language he is using. The language he is using is strong because the challenge before him was very strong. The Muslim League, the sort of politics Muslim League was playing in those times, and if you read that period and particularly Rizwan's work, and I'm not doing that sort of work. Rizwan has got into the politics of Congress Party as such, and I'm dealing with ideas mostly in my book. But most of the thoughts which he expressed in his writings, those thoughts were expressed in very, very strong language. Maulana was aware of the fault lines between the two communities, which were being used by the British as well as the Muslim League to polarize the Hindus and Muslims. And these fault lines, unfortunately, the same fault lines continue to be exploited by all those who can unabashedly polarize people and promote hatred and fear of each other. And that is true even now. And I'm repeating it. The same polarization, the same division, the same fault lines are being used even now by both communities, the Hindu communities as well as the Muslim communities. Today, Hindu communities are actually on the aggressive because we are living in a different sort of India today. So we see one variety more active, using it more actively and more unabashedly. Aisha Jalal, who has written extensively on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, she was somewhat off the mark when she observed that a false dichotomy between good secular nationalism and bad religious communalism in statist historiography has long bedeviled our understanding of the late 19th, early 20th century anti-colonialism. Hindus and Muslims in India were trying in this period to contribute to an emerging discourse on Indian nation. And this is what I am trying to question. She says that the Hindu communalism and the Muslim communalism was actually part of the debate on the future Indian nation. The future Indian nation, which was being conceived of, it was actually part of that debate. I don't agree with this idea at all. This can be true only if you decide to see Indians as Hindus and Muslims, which she is trying to see, which was being done by the communal groups also. Muslim League and the Hindu communal groups did not contribute to the emerging discourse on the Indian nation. That is totally untrue. It actually corroded it from within by helping the British. It did otherwise. It harmed it. It weakened it, instead of building it. Maulana Azad was one of those leaders who began as a spokesperson of the Muslim cause, but soon emerged soon merged his sectarian identity into a larger Indian one. He remained a proud Muslim and an equally proud Indian. He made it categorically clear that full 11 centuries have passed by since Muslims came to India. Islam has now as great a claim on the soil of India as Hinduism. He further spoke, and I quote his few lines. He says, "Everything bears the stamp of our joint endeavor. Our languages were different, but we grew to use a common language. Our manners and customs were dissimilar, but they produced a new synthesis. Our old dress may be seen only in ancient pictures. No fantasy or artificial scheming to separate and divide can break this unity." So this was Maulana Azad's firm belief that we all came together 11 centuries back. Since then, we have done so much together. So this was a faith of Maulana Azad which actually took him in the direction of composing something called composite nationalism, indivisible nationalism, nationalism of togetherness, nationalism devoid of hatred, nationalism devoid of othering each other, nationalism devoid of separatism. It began with a long introduction touching upon several national, international, as well as philosophical questions, but soon realized and said, using an eloquent religious imagery, and he wrote one beautiful piece, his presidential address in 1923, and I want to quote that. I think this is something so relevant in today's India. And I quote Maulana Azad, a little longish, a few lines. He said, "And I have taken so much time in describing our superstructure that the question of the foundation, that is Hindu-Muslim unity, still needs to be considered. Without this foundation, our freedom and all the factors of our country's life and progress will remain a dream. Without it, once again, we cannot create within ourselves the primary principles of humanism. Today, if an angel were to descend from the heaven and declare from the top of the Qutub Minar that India will get Swaraj within 24 hours, provided she relinquishes Hindu-Muslim unity, I will relinquish Swaraj rather than give up Hindu-Muslim unity. Delay in the attainment of Swaraj will be a loss to India, but if our unity is lost, it will be a loss for the entire mankind." So this was the sort of faith which Maulana Azad expressed in 1923, as early as 23, when he was just 35-year-old. Maulana's vision of composite nationalism was shaken immensely, which is reflected further in his address, and it was shaken after Chauri Chaura. After Chauri Chaura riots, where Hindu-Muslim unity was broken, Khilafat movement actually was fell apart. The unity which came together at Gandhi's call, all that unity was broken, and Maulana was disheartened by what he saw, and he saw this as a severe jolt or attack against the whole idea he was trying to conceive about India. But sadly, our story took a different turn. It was now a story of and these are Maulana's words, that our story was of togetherness. But after Chauri Chaura, the story has changed. The story now is of shamelessness and bloodshed. And I quote again some few lines which he spoke in 1923. He said, Instead of Swaraj and Khilafat, slogans of Shuddhi are being raised. And Shuddhi is the movement which Arya Samaj began, take Shuddhikaran of Muslims. The Muslims started Tablighi Jamaat, Maulana Muhammad Ilyas, and I'm not talking of that in today's context. But these were two movements which began in the late 1920s, which actually broke the unity of the two communities which Maulana was trying to build. Instead of Swaraj and Khilafat, slogans of Shuddhi are being raised. Save the Hindus from Muslims, says one group. Save Islam from Hinduism, says another. When the order of the day is protect Hindus and protect Muslims, who cares about the nation? This is Maulana's lamentation, and one feels sad when you read this. The press and the platform are busy fanning bigotry and obscurantism, while a duped and ignorant public is shedding blood on the streets. Now, if you look at Maulana's comment on the press is trying to divide in the 1920s. No, when the British were ruling us, the press was trying to divide Hindus and Muslims even then. The same press is trying to play the same role now. I don't see much of a difference. This is sad that independent India, the press today is playing a same divisive role. It's not just Hindu-Muslim division on the basis of caste, division on the basis of gender, division on the basis of economic disparities. All sorts of divisions are being used by the press even today. And Maulana was really saddened that the press did not play a very responsible role. It actually helped the British and their cause to divide the country and divide our emerging nationalism, which was a nationalism of togetherness to fight against the British. Few decades later, Maulana took this idea forward in his famous Congress presidential address at Ramgarh in 1940, when he referred to the several centuries of Muslim presence in India, as pointed out before, and how these years of common history have enriched India with our common achievements. Our languages, our poetry, our literature, our culture, our art, our dress, our manners and customs, the innumerable happenings of our daily lives, everything bears the stamp of our joint endeavor. Soon after independence, Azad delivered a convocation address at Patna University. And this is something which I would love to share because this happens in 1947, where Maulana goes to address a university, Patna University, the convocation address. And he cautioned people to be wary of nationalism here. He's telling people that nationalism actually is not such a great thing. You need to be very cautious. You need to tread very cautiously, because after independence, the same nationalism which brought you together, which helped you to fight against the British, can actually divide you. And he's threatening, he's almost warning people in 1947. And I quote his words. He says, "We have to keep in mind that the nationalism propagated in the 19th century Europe is all shattered, and the world is sick of the bounds of narrow nationalism. It is anxious to break those shackles. Instead of small cooped up nationalities, the world wants to build supranationalism. Obviously, there is no room for narrow-mindedness in this modern age. We shall find a secure place in the community of nations only if we are international minded and tolerant." तो मौलाना ने साफ तौर से कहा कि नैरो माइंडेडनेस से काम चलने वाला नहीं है. आपको नेशनलिस्ट होने के साथ साथ आपको अपने दरवाजे खुले रखने होंगे, जिससे बाहर से जो आने वाली हवा है वो आपको आके आपको एनरिच करे ना, आपकी जो सोच है, आपकी जो समझ है, आपकी जो नॉलेज है, उसमें इजाफा करे, बढ़ाए. तो आप एक कूप्ड अप जो नेशनलिटी है, जो दरवाजे बंद रख के आप अगर आप सोचते हैं मुल्क के बारे में, तो वो काम आने वाली नहीं है. Azad could see the consequences of faith-based aggressive nationalism, which divided the country. No, he is talking in 47. Pakistan has already been formed, and he has seen how nationalism has disfigured the country, how severe damage it has caused to the country. So all that is not going to work anymore now once we are independent. So he emphasized that we need to go beyond this aggressive nationalism which has divided the country and killed millions in the name of religion. Addressing the again, this is again very interesting. He goes to AMU in 1949, and you need to keep in mind that Maulana Azad was very critical of AMU's politics, because AMU was very deeply involved with Muslim League politics. The educated Muslims, large number of them professional Muslims, were actually part of the Muslim League. Maulana Azad faced this problem while he was fighting for the British, while he was trying to mobilize Muslims for the Congress party, and he could see that a large number of people didn't really agree with Maulana Azad's idea, and so they remained. A large number of them remained with Muslim League, and so after independence, Maulana goes there in 1949, and he reiterated his commitment to indivisible nationalism, saying, "I have no doubt in my mind that if you can imbibe this spirit of progressive nationalism, which is the motto of our secular democratic state, there will be no position in any field of life that will be beyond your reach." So he's trying to, well, I'm trying to avoid lots of other things which he says, and he actually makes very strong remarks against the AMU's politics. He was hugely influenced by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in the early stages of his life. He actually broke away from his father because of Sir Syed, because he was so fond of him and his modernity. But he disagreed with Sir Syed's politics. He said that you cannot keep away from freedom struggle, because Sir Syed's politics was that Muslims have to study. Education is the priority, not actually fight against the British. So that was something which Maulana Azad didn't agree. So he kept away from Sir Syed's political ideas. And he wrote about it, about his differences with Sir Syed's political ideas later on in many of his writings. Sir Syed, Maulana Azad wrote a very interesting article, which I cannot talk about in detail in this short time. This article was called "Islam and Nationalism," which was published in 1927 in Al Hilal. And we cannot comprehend fully the notion of Maulana Azad's composite or indivisible nationalism without understanding the founds of his inspiration, what actually inspired him. And the foundational spirit here was his deep and critical reading of the Quran and its history. He attempted to reinterpret Islamic theology itself in such a way as to make it compatible with the religiously composite, politically secular trajectory of India, which found its most extended statement in the unfinished Tarjuman Quran in the 1930s. So Maulana, and I'm not going to talk about Tarjuman al-Quran here, but Tarjuman al-Quran is one example how Maulana is trying to read Quran. He could translate only 18 surahs. The full Quran he couldn't do because he couldn't find time to finish it. But in 18 sections, while he is translating and interpreting, he is taking a very it's very amazing. He takes a very a comparative perspective. No, he talks about Hinduism while he is talking about Tarjuman al-Quran. Talks about Christianity, he talks about Judaism, he talks about different philosophies, the Greek thought, the Hindu thought, Hindu religion and Hindu philosophy. He talks about all of them and puts Islam in a comparative perspective. He even justifies idol worship. No, he says idol worship is nothing, it has nothing to do with actually monotheism. No, Hindus also believe in one God. All these different figures which they use actually are used for concentration, to devote, for dedication. So don't actually question their monotheism. All religions have their origin in monotheism. So that is a different story, which I have dealt with in a different chapter. But this is how Maulana is trying to understand Quran. And in this context, He's trying to understand nationalism as well. That nationalism cannot be, like he gives an example of the Prophet's formation of the first nation in Medina, and he says if Prophet could actually get into an agreement with the Jews, with Judaism, and the early Muslims and Jews who were the residents of Medina before Islam went there from Mecca. So he formed a composite nation, the first composite nation, which Prophet himself formed in collaboration with the Jews. We know it didn't last very long later on, but this was an idea which the Prophet himself conceived. If Prophet could conceive an idea like this, then why can't we form a nation with the Hindus in India? Now, how can you say that Muslims cannot form a nation with Hindus if Prophet can form a nation with Jews in his own lifetime? So these were the examples he's trying to give. There are forces. Now, I want to don't want to go into details. Let me talk about बहुत सी ऐसी चीजें हैं जो आमतौर से लोग नहीं जानते हैं. जैसे मौलाना आजाद के बारे में कहा जाता है कि साहब मौलाना आजाद का जो राष्ट्रवाद है, जो नेशनलिज्म है, जो इंडिविजुअल नेशनलिज्म की बात करते हैं, वो कहाँ रहा जब पार्टीशन हो गया? मुसलमान तो पाकिस्तान चले गए, और आज जो हमारा हिंदू फिरका परस्त है इस मुल्क में, वो ये कहता है कि साहब मुसलमानों ने तो मुल्क बना दिया, तो फिर यहाँ है क्यों? नो, इनका तो मुल्क ये है ही नहीं. नो, मौलाना आजाद तो फेल हो गए थे, वो कामयाब कहाँ हुए? वो तो पाकिस्तान को नहीं रोक पाए, इंडिया को डिवाइड होने से नहीं रोक पाए. ये बात अपनी जगह सही है कि ये डिवीजन हुआ, लेकिन मौलाना आजाद की सियासत अगर आप देखिए, और मैं ये एग्जांपल देता हूँ कि मौलाना आजाद की वजह से ही देवबंद के उलमा, चाहे उसमें मौलाना हुसैन अहमद मदनी हो या और लोग हों जो उस वक्त मौलाना के साथ खड़े हुए, और उन्होंने, आज हम देवबंद के बारे में बहुत सी बातें करते हैं,
बाद में भी
ये एक रिग्रेसिव इस्लाम की बात करते हैं, बहुत सारे बड़े फ्रिवलस किस्म के फतवे जारी होते हैं जो हम सब लोग जिनसे परहेज करते हैं, ये नहीं होना चाहिए, वो इस्लाम को नुकसान पहुंचाते हैं. लेकिन उस वक्त का जो देवबंद की जो सोच थी, वो मौलाना आजाद के साथ थी. बड़ी तादाद में देवबंद सेमिनारी से जुड़े लोग, देवबंद मदरसे से जुड़े लोग मौलाना हुसैन अहमद मदनी की क़यादत में बड़ी तादाद में लोगों को जोड़ा, और उन मुसलमानों को जोड़ा जिनको हम अजलाफ कहते हैं, जिनको हम बैकवर्ड मुस्लिम कहते हैं. आज मुस्लिम लीग की जो सियासत थी, मुस्लिम लीग का जो नेशनलिज्म था, इस्लामिक नेशनलिज्म की जो बात करते थे, अल्लामा इकबाल जिसकी बात करते थे, वो नेशनलिज्म जमींदारों का था, पैसे वालों का था, प्रोफेशनल क्लासेस का था. जो बाकी मुसलमान है, जो गरीब तबका है, उसको कोई थ्रेट नजर नहीं आता था. वो जानता था कि वो अपना ये छोटा मोटा जो आर्टिजनल जो सेक्शंस हैं, जो हाथ से काम करने वाले मुसलमान थे, बड़ी तादाद में मुसलमान थे जो हाथ से काम करने वाले थे, जो कारीगर लोग थे, जो हिंदुस्तान में रहे. इसकी डेमोग्राफी मैं कोट करता हूँ कि वेस्टर्न उत्तर प्रदेश, और ये मैं मौलाना आजाद के फेवर में बोल रहा हूँ कि उनको आप फेल नहीं कह सकते. मौलाना आजाद की बात सुन के देवबंद सेमिनारी के लोग, मौलाना हुसैन अहमद मदनी के साथ जो लोग जुड़े थे, उन लोगों ने फैसला किया कि वो लोग पाकिस्तान नहीं जाएंगे. वो कौन लोग थे? वेस्टर्न यूपी से मुजफ्फरनगर, सहारनपुर, मेरठ, बिजनौर, मुरादाबाद, रामपुर, ये जो पूरे इलाके हैं, और बहुत सारे आप इसमें जोड़ सकते हैं वेस्टर्न यूपी के, इनमें आज मुस्लिम पॉपुलेशन 26% है, जबकि उत्तर प्रदेश में मुस्लिम पॉपुलेशन 18% है. उस वक्त भी बड़ी तादाद में जो ये सेक्शन है, जिसको आप अंसारी बिरादरी भी कह सकते हैं, जिसपे आप कुरैशी बिरादरी भी कह सकते हैं, बहुत सारे ऐसे तबके हैं जिनको आप अजलाफ कहते हैं, इन सब लोगों ने, मैंने ये ट्राई करके देखा है, आप भी कभी ट्राई करके देखिए, आप जाके पूछें, उन फैमिलीज में से बहुत ही कम आपको ऐसी फैमिलीज मिलेंगी जो डिवाइडेड है. वो उनका कोई रिश्तेदार पाकिस्तान में नहीं है, बहुत ही कम फैमिलीज है. ये सिर्फ शेख, सैयद, पठान, बड़ी जो फैमिलीज थी, वो डिवाइडेड है. हम जैसे लोग, हमारा पूरी परिवार डिवाइडेड है. इस तरह के बहुत सारे लोग होंगे. तो ये एक तबका जिसको कोई अट्रैक्शन मुस्लिम लीग की सियासत में नहीं लगता था, جس کو کوئی اپرچونٹی نہیں دکھائی دیتی تھی, جو غریب تھا وہ نہیں چاہتا تھا کہ وہ اس ملک میں جائے جو اتنا انسیکیور ہے, جس کے بارے میں کچھ معلوم ہی نہیں ہے نا, تو وہ اس چیز کو کیوں چھوڑ جائے جو تھوڑا بہت اس کے پاس ہے. تو بڑی تعداد میں لوگ نہیں گئے, زمیندار لوگ گئے, پیسے والے گئے, جن کو نوکری چاہیے تھی, جن کو بزنس چاہیے تھا, جو تھریٹن فیل کرتے تھے, وہ لوگ. غریب گیا جو انڈر پریشر بھاگا, جو ڈر کے بھاگا, وہ تو گئے. یا جو بالکل پنجاب میں فرنٹ پر تھے کمیونل پالیٹکس کے, ان کو جانا پڑا, ادھر سے بھی ادھر آنا پڑا, ادھر سے ادھر جانا پڑا. تو یہ ایک سیاست تھی جس کو مولانا آزاد جیسے لوگوں نے اپنے جو کیمپین تھا اس سے بڑی تعداد میں لوگوں کو روکا اور ہندوستان چھوڑ کے جانے سے روکا. تو میں مانتا ہوں کہ وہ پارٹیشن کو نہیں روک پائے, لیکن ایک بڑی تعداد میں ان لوگوں کو روکا جن کو کنونس کیا کہ وہ لوگ پاکستان میں سیکیور نہیں ہیں, وہ ہندوستان میں ہی سیکیور ہیں, ہندوستان ہی ان کا گھر ہے. اور یہ ایک کمپوزٹ نیشنلزم کی بات ہے مولانا کی, اور حسین احمد مدنی جیسے لوگوں کی بات کو لوگوں نے سنا اور اپنے ملک کو چھوڑنے کا انکار کیا, اور بڑی تعداد میں لوگ یہاں رکے. تو میں نہیں مانتا ہوں کہ مولانا آزاد کو ایک ہم کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ وہ ایکچولی فیل ہو گئے. وہ فیل ہوئے کہ پارٹیشن نہیں روک پائے, وہ ایک دیئر از اے فیکٹ آف ہسٹری. لیکن ایسا نہیں ہے کہ مولانا آزاد جیسے لوگوں نے بڑی تعداد میں لوگوں کو کنونس نہ کیا ہو کہ وہ ہندوستان میں رہیں اور ہندوستان کا جو راشٹرواد ہے اس میں کمپوزٹ نیشنلزم میں اپنا فیتھ ظاہر کریں. اور میں I will end with few comments about people who actually helped to compose this whole idea of composite nationalism. اور بہت سارے لوگ جنرلی یہی بات سوچتے ہیں کہ مولانا آزاد اکیلے لڑائی لڑتے رہے, جس کے بارے میں نے شروع میں بھی کہا. بہت سارے ایسے لوگ تھے جیسے اللہ بخش سمرو جیسے لوگ, جس کے بارے میں رضوان نے بھی تھوڑا سا لکھا تھا, لیکن میں اس کے بارے میں تھوڑا زیادہ تفصیل میں لکھ رہا ہوں اپنے اس میں. اللہ بخش سمرو جیسے لوگ سندھ کے لیڈر تھے جنہوں نے آزاد مسلم کانفرنس آرگنائز کی 1940 میں, مولانا آزاد کے ساتھ جڑ کے بہت سارا ساتھ میں کام کیا کمپوزٹ نیشنلزم کو مضبوط کرنے کے لیے. اور کوشش یہ کی بتانے کی لوگوں کو کہ ہندوستان سب کا ہے, ہندوستان ہندو اور مسلمان کا ہندوستان نہیں ہے. اور اس کے لیے انہوں نے بڑا, مطلب بعد میں اللہ بخش سمرو کا مرڈر بھی ہوا اور اس میں کہا گیا کہ مسلم لیگ کا ہاتھ ہے, کیونکہ وہ ایک میجر تھریٹ مسلم لیگ کے لیے تھے. میں اس لیے اس بات کو کہہ رہا ہوں کہ 1940 میں جب مسلم لیگ نے پارٹیشن کا ریزولوشن پاس کیا اپنے سیشن میں 2 نیشن تھیوری کے بیسس پر, اسی 1940 میں اپریل کے مہینے میں دلی میں قریب 1 لاکھ مسلمان آزاد مسلم کانفرنس کے بینر کے انڈر اکٹھے کیے اللہ بخش نے, جس کی صدارت اللہ بخش نے کیا. مولانا آزاد اس میں شامل نہیں ہو پائے تھے کیونکہ کہیں اور بزی تھے, لیکن انہوں نے اپنا میسج بھیجا. اور ان 1 لاکھ مسلمانوں کا جو آپ کمپوزیشن اگر آپ دیکھیں تو اس میں زیادہ تر وہ مسلمان ہیں جو نہ تو زمیندار طبقے سے ہیں نہ پروفیشنل ہیں. وہ سب وہ لوگ تھے جو ہاتھ سے کام کرنے والے کاریگر لوگ, پسماندہ طبقے کے مسلمان, وہ سب شامل ہوئے. اور قریب 75,000 سے 1 لاکھ کی تعداد بتائی جاتی ہے. اس 1940 میں یہ ایک بڑا تعداد ہے اور دلی شہر میں ہوا. تو یہ ایک بڑا سیکشن تھا جو مولانا آزاد کے ساتھ جڑا تھا, جو ان کو مضبوطی دیتا تھا. ہمارے سیف الدین کشلو جیسے لوگ تھے پنجاب میں جو ساتھ میں شامل تھے, اور بہت سارے لوگ ہیں جن کا نام ہم لے سکتے ہیں. اور میں تھوڑا سا ایک کوٹ اللہ بخش کا ہے سیمپل کی طرح آپ کو پڑھ کے سنانا چاہتا ہوں, کیونکہ وہ پتا ہونا چاہیے اور کیسی سوچ تھی, کس قسم کا ہندوستان یہ لوگ چاہتے تھے. He spoke in his address in 1940, Allah Baksh, he said, "It is a vicious fallacy for Hindu, Muslim and other inhabitants of India to arrogate to themselves an exclusively proprietary right over either the whole or the particular part of India. The country as an indivisible whole and as an federated and composite unit belongs to all the inhabitants of the country alike and is as much the inalienable and imprescriptible heritage of their Indian Muslims as of other Indians. So these were few ideas which he tried to express and tried to convey through his conference. So Maulana Azad actually was not alone. Contrarily, Maulana Azad's inheritance is actually a vision of an undivided India where all communities could live peacefully. A truly national mission for him was an indivisible nationalism, which he prioritized even before the freedom of India in his Congress presidential address of 1923, which I referred to earlier. He spent all his active political years during freedom struggle as a whipping boy of the Muslim League, derided and mocked by Jinnah and the League as a collaborator of the Hindus and a mere spectacle in the Congress scheme of creating a Hindu India. It is this composite nationalism which kept India together for several decades after independence, where there were threats on the way, there were divisive forces which remained on the margins. It is not the same anymore. The threats to this idea of India are real, which we all as Indians need to combat to save the plural, democratic and secular fabric of the nation. The composite nationalism we inherited was not the creation of Maulana Azad alone. He was surely one of the important players in this creation. This nationalism can be given different names, and I have used it in my book on nationalism, which came out three years ago. It can be called indivisible nationalism. It can be called empathetic nationalism. It can be called eclectic nationalism. It can be called revolutionary nationalism, or even cosmopolitan nationalism. So various names one can give. It was a collaborative project that included Tagore, Tilak, Gandhi, Patel, Nehru, Bose, Bhagat Singh, and so many others. All these nationalism stood for a united India where there was no space for a divisive and hate-filled vision. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you so much.
Actually, he has discussed at length